Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. All right, good evening everybody. Welcome. We had some technical issues literally up to the last minute. I had to unload and reload, but I think we got there. Like literally in the last minute, it finally loaded on. So yeah, it's coming through. We're rocking and rolling. Welcome. So glad to have you here. I am back. I took last week off. Thank you for that. I was down and out with COVID and feeling much, much better. The last 2 weeks, my family and I have been navigating the joys of a pandemic, and so I am sipping tea and feeling much better. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for your support. The Christ Church team has been incredible for me and the rest of my family that were down and out with COVID these last 13 days in quarantine, something like that. We were in quarantine for a long time, but today was the first day kind of coming and getting a chance to reconnect with the team, planning for Sunday, and we are back at it. Woo! Never thought that Christmas Eve, like literally right before Christmas Eve, we'd go down. But hey, God is good, and the team was incredible. So it's been all cylinders firing and stuff. So yeah, thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. It is good to be back in the saddle, guys. It's fun to be streaming with you tonight. It's fun to be back and connecting with staff and hearing the incredible God stories that have been going on. I am sporting my new Mandalorian hat that is from my mother-in-law, as well as my new Wisconsin mug. Love the mug. Good. I'm glad, Mom. Thanks. Oh, can you guys see it? Wisconsin. So this is Starbucks featured Wisconsin mug. Right? So it's got all the different various Wisconsin-oriented stuff. I love it. You guys always spoil me with all my fun mugs. And I got a new hat, too. That's right. A lot of fun. So glad you guys are here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining in tonight. We are rocking and rolling. If you did... so last week I was down and out. The week before that, which would have been the 22nd of December. Is that right? I don't know. I can't quite follow. The last one, it's online as well. The last one we did, and where we left off was with King David. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, just kind of brushing up on stuff, and then we're diving into new content and new stuff. If you're new to the stream, what we do on Tuesday nights is teaching the biblical narrative and the biblical story. We've been looking at and traveling through the Bible in a narrative fashion. That's a fancy way of saying story. It's like a big story. The Bible's like a big story, but it's not organized like a story. I know that sounds really confusing and really bizarre, but believe it or not, the Bible is not organized in chronological order. And so what we are doing is we are kind of looking at it through a more chronological narrative lens as a cohesive story. And so we've been looking at characters, and we've been looking at themes, and we've been looking at all sorts of stuff for the last number of weeks. We are on 14. Wow, 14 weeks we've been specifically doing this. Before that, we did some other stuff as well. We looked at Paul, we looked at the temple, we did Gospels, we've done all sorts of stuff on the stream. So having fun. 22 video kept cut. If the video is cutting out on you, Michelle, try refreshing it on your end. It says I'm streaming strong on my end, so give it a refresh and see if that helps. Thank you, Trudy. The rest of my family is doing equally so, doing well. My wife, Patty, was the biggest concern because she is pregnant and well into her pregnancy, and so there was a lot of concern about her and her ability to maintain an oxygen threshold. Fortunately, she did. We were checking her oxygen levels 3 times a day, and it never dipped below a certain threshold where we'd have to go to the hospital. So the good news is that we were able to monitor everything from our home. Oh, the one on the 22nd was having issues? Really? Oh, that's odd. Okay. I'll have to go back and rewatch the YouTube. If you're try watching the YouTube auto posting of it, and I'll check into that too if you're having troubles on the 22nd. Sorry if you were. That was a pre-recorded one too. That was a pre-record. I think I shared that before. So, well, we're picking up and this is why recaps are so important. So to answer true to your question, my immediate family is doing really well, as is my extended family, which also went down. So Pastor Bob's doing well. He's back. He's got a pretty bad lingering cough. Somehow he picked up a cold at the end of COVID. So he's got a bit of a cold now that he's coming out of COVID. But he as well is doing fine. My mother is doing fine. And so forth. Oh yeah, questions from last time. Joe's all sorts of David's story is repeated in the Chronicles. Yes, David's story is covered in Chronicles as well as 1st and 2nd Samuel. We get the story of David and stuff. Hey, the Moros are here. Happy first day of quarantine for you guys. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for hanging out tonight and making the most of today. Sorry, jump back to Joe. Yeah, so Chronicles in the but they're the same and yet different. So some of the stories overlap and dovetail. There's 2 different books in the Bibles: 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. So 3 really, that all those books deal with very similar time frames, themes, and kind of the historical position of ancient Israel at that time. And so if you read, for example, Chronicles, 1st Chronicles or 2nd Chronicles, you will see many of the same characters, many of the same themes, and many of the same historical activities at that point in time. But you also find differences, different authors, different people wrote them. So depending. Generally speaking, in the narrative form, we follow like 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then today we'll get into 1st and 2nd Kings, and that's because they're more closely written in a way where they follow one after the other. A lot of scholars debate. There's all sorts of scholarship and debate around, what texts, what actual texts, the texts. Texts that the authors had or did not have at the time in which they actually wrote things down. And then you also have oral tradition complicating things as well. So, okay, wait, where's your Jesus question? Last time you mentioned the story foreshadowing Jesus. Yes, there's a lot of foreshadowing of Jesus that happens in the Old Testament. But of course, Jews believe it foreshadows an earthly kingdom as they waited and anointed king. Yes, so if I get your question correctly, Joe, it's the question and the tension around, we as Christians, when we read and we look back at a lot of these stories, like specifically the story of David, and when we look at the God's promise to David that a king will come and a Messiah will come, a king will come, the Jewish people are still awaiting that messianic king. They're still waiting that Davidic promise. They're still waiting for a Messiah. And alongside of that, I think it's fair to say that their supposition and assumptions around what a king would look like would be, to use your term, earthly. It foreshadows more so the establishment of really the physical boundaries of King David's kingdom. This is where a lot of the contemporary Zionist movement continues to draw upon, is this train of thought. So in the mid 1900s, when the movement came to establish Israel as we know today as an independent country, they drew on these sort of texts. They drew on these sort of references and this type of theology. A lot of Jews believe that once they establish Israel as an independent country, that the Messiah would either present himself, or that in fact the country itself could be a representative or a symbolic allegory for the messianic David, if you will. So it's very complicated, but yes, the Jews continue to wait what we would term as being, a more earthly, a more traditional Messiah, a king, like a king in the way that David was a king, as opposed to Christians who believe that Jesus fulfills that David's the promise that was made to David. Christians, we look at that, we read that, and we're like, oh my gosh, this has got Jesus written all over it. A king who will reign forever, a king who will have no end, a king who's gonna, be unique in so many ways. And in fact, if you go to which one? It evades me. The exact reference point evades me. But if you go into the New Testament, this promise is actually spoken about by, I forget which one, and that's why I'm hesitant to give a name to it. Either a gospel, one of the apostles, maybe it's in the book of Acts, where it talks about, you know, that Jesus is this guy. Jesus is this promised Messiah to David. Really good question. So, yes, the Jews are still waiting for the earthly king. Christians, we believe that Jesus fulfills this Davidic promise. Hallie, hang in there. Working out for the second time already in the garage. Wow. Yep. You are going to be, if it's possible for you, you will be more fit coming out of COVID than you were before, which is hard to believe. So I'm sure Joe is probably enjoying and streaming in the living room on the big screen TV, YouTube, hanging out with us right now, right? Huh? Probably. Awesome. Okay, here we go, guys. You all ready? Let's do it. Let's jump back in and kind of pick it up, and we'll do our recap. And let me play my fancy pantsy intro video, because what the heck? Why not? It's so fun. I love that. That's so fun. What a great intro. All right, let's do it. Let's do a recap and then dive into new content, picking up where we left off. If you did, Michelle, for example, or for others who had problems with the stuttering, I'll do my best to give you a recap. Whoops. Ruh-roh, that's not what you need to see. That's what you need to see. Okay. This is where we kind of left off. I'll also have scripture up on the screen, guys, as always. We're reading out of the NLT is what I'm using. Yeah, my font size should be big enough for you guys, unless you're watching on your phone. All right, I'll blow it up bigger, large. That's better. Okay. So the curriculum we use is the, loosely considered to be Crossways, and it's a divine drama. It's a curriculum. So there's really great graphics that go along with this walk that we're doing and this study that we're doing. And in this graphic, let me describe to you a couple things that are happening that will help locate us within the biblical narrative. The big figure that you need to be aware of is that dude who's staring at us. It's kind of creepy in some ways, but that's supposed to be King David. That's David. David is one of the central figures within the context of the biblical story. I mean, the guy's huge. Absolutely a mammoth, a monster, a giant biblical figure, and he continues to have, the reputation to this very day of being influential worldwide. I mean, we were talking about modern day Israel, for example. You look at David's star is the Jewish flag. I mean, it's the star that's based on this guy and his story, and et cetera, et cetera. So David is looking at us, and David has been established now as king of ancient Israel. That's kind of where we left off. David becomes king, and he becomes king in a pretty rough way. Let's be honest. I mean, it's nasty. The way in which he becomes king is really filled with his backdrop is filled with bloodshed, betrayal. Kind of a mixed bag of success and failure for David. More success by far than failure. Don't get me wrong, but as a reminder, his father-in-law was the previous king, King Saul, and King Saul really ends up in a dark place and goes on a hunt for David. David has to live as kind of the Robin Hood with his merry band of men on the run, saving people, rescuing people, while his father-in-law tries to hunt him down and kill him because he sees him as a big threat to the throne. Eventually, Saul dies through a different battle, and everybody turns to David, and it's like, it's time. David's finally able to be king. Like, David can be king, legitimately recognized as king. The southern part of ancient Israel accepts him as king right away, and that's because he's a southern boy. He's from down south. The northern part of ancient Israel is much slower, 7 years slower to be exact. I believe it's 7 years. They're slower to accept David as king, but eventually they're like, yeah, we're on board with this too. And David does some very shrewd political machinations. He does some really good, thoughtful moves early on in his reign. Most notably, he establishes a new capital that is neither in the south nor in the north. The north kind of has its big city, and the south has its big city. And David decides to make a city in the middle the new capital where he is going to rule from. And that is, of course, Jerusalem. He establishes Jerusalem as his new capital. It's this rinky-dink city that's really a little bit of nothing. It's a military outpost on the top of a mountain kind of area. It's got valleys on both sides. And so it's got, it's like a plateau on the top of this. It's a plateau with steep valleys on both sides and big fortifications is what it was. And David sends in his covert operations team, and they take it. They take over Jerusalem, and David says, okay, from now on, Jerusalem was the place that's going to unite all of ancient Israel. And so he moves the center of religion there. He moves the political scene takes place there. Economics. I mean, everything shifts politically, religiously, and militarily. Now it centers on the city of Jerusalem. And to this very day, Jerusalem is Jerusalem. The Jerusalem that we know and we visit, where everything within the context of the Judeo-Christian faith kind of centers around. And it's because of this move, because David chose to do this. And it was a brilliant move on his part, choosing the city that's neither in the north nor in the south. Now, I realize if you look on the map, you can see there, Jerusalem is there, and it's got a little star. It's really hard to make out. I wish they did a better job. But if you look at the blue lake on the top side and you look directly to the left, that's where Jerusalem is. To the south, the big city is Hebron. That's where his old capital was. And up north, there was a capital as well. It's not listed on this particular map. Doesn't really matter. But that's the midpoint, Jerusalem. Everything to the south is one type of tribal orientation to it, and everything to the north is there's a north-south split. Jerusalem straddles it. So that's kind of where we left off, is David establishing his kingdom now in Jerusalem. And as he does it, he says, wow, I got my own kingdom now. I got my own, this is working. I'm the king. I'm set up. I got my own city. I'm going to rule and reign from the city. I have all this. I should do something nice for God because God gave this to me. So I should do something nice for God. And that's where we left off last week, or last time, talking about how God kind of laughs at David, like, oh my gosh, David, David, you do some things really well, but some things just go whoop, right past you. And one of the things that goes right past you, David, is the fact that I'm not doing all of this so that you're going to turn around and give me something. David says, you know what? I have this incredible palace, this big house. I'm going to build you a house, God. And God's like, I don't need no stinking house. I'm God. I don't need a house. In fact, I'm going to make you a house. And that's where we get into the conversation around a word play. The word that God uses is dynasty. I'm going to make you a house, a dynasty. And that's where we get the Davidic promise of a Messiah. A house that will have no end, with a ruler and a king, a future king, a descendant of David who is going to be established and reign forever. So this big moment happens between David and God, is kind of where we left off last time. So now things get spicy. Let's jump into it. He has some victories. He does some stuff. But really the next major benchmark is, sadly, a story that many of us, if you know anything about David, it's not uncommon to have this story. David is known for a couple specific stories, like David and Goliath. Everybody seems to know the story of David and Goliath. One of the other stories that a lot of people seem to know is the story of David and... Any guesses? Yeah, there you go. Type it in the comments. Guess. What story I'm about to talk about? It's not David and Goliath. It's David and who? Throw it in the comments if you know. Oh, you guys are commenting too. What are you saying? Odd, Michelle, that it cut right around 40 minutes, huh? Yeah, there we go. First one on the name. Patty knew it. Thank you, Patty. Yep. Okay. So you knew, huh? You all knew. Yeah. Isn't that sad? Here we have the king, King David. And we think of, how great is King David? How awesome is King David? And then we realize, oh, dang, how messy is King David? And that's when we get this story, the story of David and Bathsheba. This is not on David's highlight reel, everybody. To be honest, I don't want to spend too much time going into the details of the story. It is a long, intricate story, but the long and the short of it is this, that David is feeling good. David is launching a couple wars. He's got a couple wars going on, but overall, he's doing really well. He sends his army out to go fight, and yet he decides to hang out and be king and chillax in his new palace. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest. I mean, look at this. The guy's king. His army is out fighting without him. I mean, he's putting his feet up, taking a nap. He's taking a little siesta. He gets up out of bed. He's walking on the roof of the palace. So he's taking a stroll. And their roofs were not the same kind of our roofs. If you've ever been to the Middle East, they all have flat roofs instead of pitched roofs. We have pitched roofs. Why do we have pitched roofs? Because snow. That's why. Because we live in Wisconsin and it rains and it snows. It doesn't do that out in the Middle East. So, they often have flat roofs with storage or gardens, things like that up top. So he's taking a walk after an afternoon siesta. And this is kind of odd, but he's looking out over the city. And what does he see on a different roof? A woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. Bathsheba's out taking a sponge bath with the windows open, y'all. I mean, Bathsheba, what you doing? And he's peeking. Can you believe it? I mean, goodness gracious. He doesn't know who it is, but he wants to find out. So he goes and he sends people. And he's the king, so he uses his kingliness to invite her over for dinner, and she stays the night. Not cool. She goes home, and what happens when you spend the night? Preggers. That's what happens when you spend the night. So David has a relationship, intimacy with Bathsheba, gets her pregnant, and she's a married woman. Not cool. She's married to a guy named Uriah the Hittite. Now, Uriah is out fighting David's war. Uriah is out fighting David's war, and while he's gone, David gets Bathsheba pregnant. Not cool. Not good. Bad situation. David, faced with a royal scandal, if you will, comes up with a plan. And the plan is simple. She's married, so get the husband to come home as fast as you possibly can and get a little R&R. Call him back from the front lines, have him come home and get a little R&R. Wink, wink. Spend a little time with your wifey there, Uriah. Enjoy some time. You've worked so hard fighting for me. Thank you so much. You get a special measure of R&R. Go home, enjoy your wife, have a drink on me. That's plan A. Uriah says wow, that's really great. Thank you. But he's such an upstanding dude. When he goes home, he doesn't spend the night with his wife. His rationale? How can I go and sleep in my own bed when my soldiers are on the front lines? If they find out that I'm at home enjoying the company of my own wife, drinking my own wine and sleeping in my own bed, what kind of general, what kind of leader, what kind of fighter am I? My guys will all desert me. They won't have any kudos for me, man. I mean, are you serious? They'll all bail on me when I need them. So Uriah does the upstanding thing and doesn't go and instead sleeps at a hotel down the street. Sure, he sees her, but he doesn't spend a night. So then David decides to get him drunk. I love the Bible. I mean, this is like, this is TV worthy. I don't know, like, you know, do you get the suspense here? A king caught in a scandal, and he's got to fix it and all this stuff. So he gets him drunk. That doesn't work. Uriah's still too upstanding. So, all right, plan A didn't work. Time to go to plan B, everybody. The title kind of gives it away. David arranges for Uriah's death. Well, it's simple enough. If Uriah won't go in and sleep with his wife, everybody's going to know this is my kid. It's going to be a scandal. So we need to off Uriah. It's time to kill him. Oh, man, this is so bad. So the plan is simple. Station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest. He's talking to David instructs his general Joab. Joab is his cousin and general, lead general. He says, look, Joab, I need you to do me a solid. I need you to not ask any questions, but put Uriah on the front lines where it's the nastiest. Then pull back real fast. Bail on him so that he'll be killed. And Joab does it. Uriah is killed, along with several other soldiers. I mean, forgive me for laughing, but it's not funny. It's embarrassing. It's horrible. This is not on David's highlight reel. I mean, he's being a real. It's not good. Not good. Well, David gets the news. Joab sends it back, says, guess what? It worked. He's dead. Hooray! What does David do? Well, he lets Bathsheba have the appropriate time of mourning while pregnant. And then he brings her into his harem. Then she gave birth to a son. And the Bible summarizes, but the Lord was displeased with what David had done. You know, so often in a lot of churches, in a lot of sermons, in a lot of biblical studies, people who are unfamiliar or people who are just theologically oriented differently than myself. I shouldn't. Oftentimes, if we are not careful, I think people can fall into the trap of making heroes of biblical characters and placing them on pedestals. The beauty of the biblical narrative isn't that there are all these outstanding, incredible people that we should aspire to be like. Rather, the beauty of the biblical narrative is that God uses broken, horrible people to do incredible things, right? I mean, the beauty here is found not in David, but in the fact that God is willing to use, work through, and love David, even though David is not a perfect person. He is far from a perfect person. And this story captures that. This story tries to show you and protect you from placing David on such a high pedestal that you lose sight of God and you begin to worship David instead of worshiping God. God's the hero here, and this story reminds us of that. All right, what happens next? Well, he gets confronted. Yeah, okay, so there you go. That's the story. David gets confronted by a guy named Nathan, who happens to be the resident prophet, priest, pastor. He's David's pastor. He comes, and Nathan, it's this big dramatic scene. Nathan comes in and confronts David by telling him a story. He says, look, I got a story for you, David. And David's like, okay, what's the story? The story is how a man had a sheep, and he loved the sheep, and he took care of the sheep. It was a little lamb. It meant the world to him. It meant everything to him. And a mean, powerful, jealous guy who's got a whole bunch of his own sheep came down the road, stopped at the farm, and scooped up the good farmer's sheep and carried it off for his own, and left the farmer desolate and alone. David's like, oh, that's terrible. That's horrible. That mean old guy stole the sheep. That's terrible. And it's this big dramatic moment where, let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Let me show it to you guys. It's so good. All right, let me just read it. Who am I kidding? It's so good. I can't summarize. The Bible's too good sometimes. All right, there are two men in a certain town. One was rich, one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he'd bought. He raised that little lamb. It grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate, drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man. But instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb, killed it, and prepared it for his guest. David, hearing the story, is furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vows, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay, check this, look at this, 4 lambs. That's going to come back. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole for having no pity. Oh, and here's the big dramatic moment. Then Nathan said to David, you are that man. Bum, bum, bum. I mean, come on. The Bible's awesome, guys. That's so dramatic. You can just picture him like standing, look him in the face, pointing a finger. You are the man. Oh, it's so good. You know, and he calls him out. And he says, look, God's furious. God gave you everything you could ever want. And you did the thing with Bathsheba, dude. You killed Uriah. What's up? This ain't cool. And this is the big moment. This is the definitive moment, actually. Because despite David's own brokenness, which we all have, it's a question of how will David respond having been confronted with his brokenness. And while as you had Saul responding and brokenness and not listening and all these sort of things, David's response here is key, and that is to say that he repents. He follows it up, verse 13. David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. So he owns it. He owns up to the fact that he made a horrible mistake and did something that he shouldn't do. And it caused the death of someone. I mean, it's no small thing. And as a result, biblical principle, guys, when you embrace brokenness and darkness, you will multiply brokenness and darkness in your own life. This is a bummer, but it's true. And that's exactly what happens in David's life. I mentioned you the 4 little lambs thing. If you look in this picture here in the bottom left-hand side, you can see 4 little lambs there. And it just so happens that for the one life that David takes, being Uriah, for killing Uriah, he has the loss of 4 of his own family members. David, great king, horrible father, terrible father. David, great king, great general, great military mastermind, great musician, all this stuff. Terrible dad. Woo, there is more dysfunction in David's family than you could imagine. It's horrible. And the sad reality is, as you explore his family's narrative, you find David loses 4 of his children. So in the same way that he took a life and said, you know, it will be multiplied back 4 times over in the parable, that's the judgment that David casts upon himself. Ironically, that's what happens to him, is the 4-fold loss. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about some of the loss. That's kind of where this ends. This story ends. You know, David loses the child that Bathsheba is pregnant with. That's the first loss. The child is sickly and dies. And then the rest of David's children, given by other concubines and queens and other women, is messy. You guys ready for this? It's so messy. Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. Here we go. So the first thing that happens, it's even hard to talk about, guys, because it's so messy and so ugly. It happens in chapter 13. David's son, Absalom. Now, bear in mind, it's all the same dad, but it's different moms. Okay, that's what's happening. Same dad, David, different moms. A whole bunch of different concubines. David has a son named Absalom, and Absalom has a beautiful sister named Tamar. David's other son, Amnon, falls desperately in love with his own half-sister, Tamar. And his unhealthy infatuation eventually gets to a point. I mean, there's more to, there's a whole scheme here and all this whole nastiness, but in the end, he ends up raping his own half-sister. Let's call it what it is. Amnon rapes his sister Tamar with the help of a friend. It is bad. It's sick. It's terrible. Tamar goes running to her brother Absalom, and it comes out. It all comes. The whole thing comes out. This all comes out. David hears and he's furious. But really, it's Absalom who. Absalom puts a mark on Amnon for committing this treacherous act, and from this point on, actually, it's going to be kind of Absalom's calling card. Is that David does not. We don't get the details of what David does. It just says that he's angry, and that's about it. So we don't know what kind of punishment was exercised and so forth. We don't know what it really ended up being, the finer details of it, if you will. Amnon goes on living, but Absalom starts plotting, and in the end ends up through an elaborate scheme killing Amnon, his half brother. So Absalom kills Amnon for raping his sister. David, of course, once again, now so that's the second kid he's lost. David loses another kid. So he's got 2 kids that are dead and a daughter that's been raped. David's family life is just horrible. It's just terrible. And there's a bunch of other messiness that goes along with this. I'm just skipping over huge details and all this sort of stuff. But in the end, Absalom has to run away, and he flees David because he's a murderer now. And so he runs away. David, to his credit, wishes that he could be reunited with his son Absalom. He wants to find reconciliation. And it just gets more messy from here. Absalom, having now this hatred of his own dad, who didn't exact the justice that he himself had to carry out, killing Amnon, Absalom ends up actually eventually campaigning down south among his supporters to launch a rebellion against his own dad. Absalom launches, and interestingly enough, a successful rebellion against his dad, who's getting older and older. Absalom goes down to Hebron, which is down south. It's the old capital. It's where his kind of David's base of power stemmed from. and he campaigns, gives stump speeches, and raises an army, and ends up coming north to kick his own dad out of the kingship and to take over. So Absalom actually ends up chasing his dad out of Jerusalem. It's a fascinating moment in the Bible. David ends up fleeing for his life, running from his enemies, and the Bible goes into great detail here. It says that he flees and runs, crossing the valley. He goes down and he crosses the Mount of Olives. Ooh, yes, that's right, the Mount of Olives. David runs away from death, weeping and crying, crossing the Mount of Olives. For us who are Christians, this echoes into the flip, which is where Jesus will cross the Mount of Olives, cross and walk towards Jerusalem, weeping. There's a point in the Bible where Jesus weeps for Jerusalem and crosses the valley to embrace death. Whereas David ran from death, weeping and crying, Jesus flips that around as David's descendant and runs towards and embraces the death that is waiting for him in Jerusalem. So it's a fascinating moment of the Bible that it's a big deal. This is a big deal. Well, a civil war ensues. David on the run from his own son, and Absalom is trying to get rid of his own dad. There's fighting that goes on, and eventually David's general Joab wins a key battle and ends up killing Absalom. David's army wins. David is hiding up north, and Joab, the general, having just killed the king's son, comes back to David to report the good news that the civil war is now over. David is the rightful king. He is to be reestablished. David is standing on the paramounts of the fortress he's hiding in up north. And he could care less about the battle. He doesn't care. All he cares about is his son. How is Absalom? Is Absalom okay? Great. We won the battle. Fabulous. How is Absalom? And he finds out that Absalom is dead. And he just loses it. He just weeps. He's now lost 3 of his kids. 3 of his kids are dead, and his daughter has been raped. So you're seeing this unfold now with the sheep thing, right? David weeps, and ironically, Joab, David's general in chief, his commanding officer, is like, WTF? What in the world? He goes nuts because David says, I wish we would have lost. I wish if I could have my son back, it would have been better to have lost. And Joab's like, I've been fighting for you. I've been waging war for you. I have literally given my entire life, hitched myself to you as the star. I have served you faithfully, and this is how you repay me? You wish we would have lost? You wish we would have lost so that your rebellious son would have won? And so Joab, from this point on, also seems to hate David. And it's a huge moment where they get angry at each other. David fires Joab, relieves him of his duty for the outburst, and replaces him with a different general. Joab, in his anger, kills his rivals. Not just one, but he does it multiple times. Every time David appoints a new commander, Joab finds a way to kill the dude. By the way, this is his habit going all the way back, if you remember, all the way back to Abner, which was the northern general. Joab is the southern general, Abner is the northern general, and Abner switches sides to come down south, and Joab kills him. He murders him. So there's some violent habits, if you will, with Joab. Not surprising. So this is showing how the whole kingdom is just unraveling, guys. That's what this is doing. David, his own son, has launched a rebellion. This whole king thing has turned out to be a horrible mess. The north, the south, tensions are only getting worse because the rebellion stemmed from the south. The north is so fed up with David and David's family that there's actually another revolt in chapter 20 towards the end of 2 Samuel, towards the end of David's life. Another revolt happens way up north in Sheba. And it's... all of this is trying to show you and me as the listener and the reader that human kings don't work. Which is exactly what the prophet previously, Samuel, had said. Everything Samuel said about how messy and horrible the reality of having a human king has come to pass. Everything that God warned and said, I'm supposed to be king. I'm God. I am your king. Live the way that I told you to live. Live according to my rules and live according to my laws. And the people were like, nah, give us a human king. That'd be better. Human king could be better? Are you guys listening to what we're talking about right now? It's just nuts. It's just nuts. All right. Getting to the end of David's life now. David is getting old. The kingdom is kind of in shambles. There's been civil war. There's been fighting. He has expanded physically the territory. If you look at the map there, he expands it from what is originally just the purple and red. He's able to claim a lot of territory. So he's had success in his life. It's not that he hasn't had success. For the average Jewish person living in that ancient Israel, to this day, David is considered to be the golden age. David's reign is the golden age because there was economic security, there was military success against all these bad guys externally, and everybody just seems to ignore the whole internal issues and domestic problems that came with David and David's family. Well, David is getting so old that they're not sure he can reign, that he's worth it to be king. And I love how crass the Bible is sometimes. There is an old school way of determining whether or not you are fit to be king and fit to reign, fit to continue to exact justice upon the nations. And it's a pretty simple recipe, actually. To keep David happy and occupied, they bring in a young virgin. And the big question is whether or not he will enjoy the company of a beautiful young virgin. If he's able to enjoy her company, when all that entails, he's fit to still be king. But if he can't seal the deal, it's time to go. Come on, that's funny. Tell me you're laughing on the other side of this, right? I mean, come on. I think it's hilarious. So that's what they do. They find a young virgin, throw the young virgin, poor girl, in bed with David, and it turns out he can't quite seal the deal. And so it starts in earnest, the transition to his two remaining sons. He's got two sons left that have a claim to the throne. The first one's Adonijah, and the second is Solomon. You heard of him? Solomon is the second child that David has with Bathsheba. Bathsheba has been lurking in the background all these years, lobbying quietly for her son Solomon. Adonijah has grown up. He's seen the success of his brother Absalom in rousing the Davidic base, and knows that David has a lot of enemies out there. So Adonijah goes and actually has the audacity before his dad is dead to declare himself king. Adonijah just like gets the people together, starts throwing a big feast, and he's smart. He's political. He gets some key supporters to throw a big feast with him. Joab, one of the generals, the guy who's killed all the other rival generals, and another guy, Abiathar, a priest, influential. They both throw their support behind Adonijah. Bathsheba hears that Adonijah is acting like a king, throwing a big elegant feast, talking about people and accepting lavish gifts and acting like the king, because word has got out that David's impotent. So she runs to David, and she runs to Nathan the prophet, who was David's personal pastor, if you will, and says, David, you always promised me that your servant, your son Solomon, would be king. So Bathsheba and Nathan, very cannily, very smart, they get David out on the front stoop of the palace with a megaphone, and they put Solomon on a donkey, and they throw a parade publicly through the streets of Jerusalem, with David shouting at the top of his old lungs that Solomon is king. Adonijah, up the street having this big lavish feast, finds out that David has officially declared his rival brother Solomon as the new next king, and he's mortified. He's terrified because he knows he's in it deep. Adonijah just tried to undermine the new king by declaring himself king, and as long as he's alive, he has a claim to the throne. Adonijah does, because he's one of David's sons. Well, shortly after Solomon becomes king, Adonijah goes into exile. Solomon lets him live and says, you have to live basically under house arrest, and you can never make a mistake. If you screw up in any way, shape, or form, if you make a run at the throne in any way, I'll kill you. I'm gonna kill you. If you do anything, you step out of line, I'm killing you. So that's what he does. Adonijah lives under house arrest. But he steps out of line. He goes and he finds the young, pretty, virgin concubine that spent time with David. And he brings her into his house. Sneaky. That is a subtle move. And to those in the know, it's a bold move. Anytime you try to take over previous relationships of kings, like if you marry their queen, if you marry their concubines, you usually adopt the harem of the previous king. When you conquer a place, you kill the king, and then you take all the ladies and you throw them into your own harem, and that helps to substantiate you as the king. You've got all the old wives. And so Adonijah tries to basically pick off the last wife that David had, concubine wife, and Solomon notices. So Solomon sends somebody to go execute him, and David's loses another child. 4. All 4. Amnon, Absalom, Adonijah, and then the original child that he shared with Bathsheba. 4 lambs are killed. That's why in the graphic there you've got the 4 lambs, 4 crowns, and blood. You've got the daggers, because 3 out of the 4 were killed violently, and then 1 was lost through sickness. So there you go. And with that, you get David on his deathbed. We finish up 2 Samuel tonight. We are going through pretty much almost we're finishing 2 Samuel tonight. So we got a couple more minutes. Let me tell you how David dies. It's really, again, really sad in some ways. It shows David's brokenness. It's kind of laughable again. For those of us with a dark sense of humor, David is on his deathbed, and his final things that he says before he dies is he actually instructs Solomon to kill some people. Yep, that's right. King David, the great King David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, David, the guy who wrote a bunch of the Psalms, the guy who was faithful in worship. Yeah, that guy, David. He's on his deathbed, and the last couple things he does is he says, Solomon, come close. Yeah, Dad, what? Here's my last will and testament. Okay. What is it? And you know, if you're reading the Bible at this point, you're imagining that David's going to say, like, I love you. I'm so proud of you. Be faithful to the Lord. You know, live a God-honoring life. Do your best for the kingdom of Israel. Unite the kingdom. You know, all this sort of. Nope. He says, Solomon, I want you to off some people. Kill them once I'm dead. So, David's final words are to kill Joab, David's cousin and general, who has served David his whole life, but has also become quite a dark character himself. David wants Solomon to kill Joab. He wants him to kill a guy named Shimei, who a long time ago, when David needed help, when David was on the run from his own son, this dude, he bumps into him on the road and he curses him and he won't help him. And David remembers on his deathbed that this dude cursed him and wouldn't help him. And so David says, hey, I want you to go find that guy and off him. That's horrible. Oh. So he does, and then there's also Abithiar the priest, and he gets sent into exile. He gets exiled because he supported Adonijah. So David dies. That's the end of David's story. It finishes with him on his deathbed asking Solomon to kill some people. There's some other stuff in there. There's more in there. David makes some other really big mistakes. He does something purposefully that God doesn't want him to do. He takes a census. It's a really big deal. We don't have time to go into it. But, in the end, kind of like the big takeaways are, David was a messy guy. I mean, we're talking super, super messy. And yet, even in his messiness, he did have a relationship with God. Even as he's cursing and asking Solomon to kill some people on his deathbed, he also prays. He also, sings a song and acknowledges how good God is and what God's done in his life. And, so he's a messy character, and because he's a messy character, he gives inspiration and hope to people like us, because I don't know about you, but my life's messy too. The fact that God would love, take care of, and yes, punish when appropriate, discipline when appropriate, but also provide for, care for, and really do amazing things. He takes a shepherd boy and rescues him time and time again, makes him king over a nation, gives him incredible success in so many ways. And David writes many of the Psalms that we have in the book of Psalms. And to this very day, here we are talking about him literally hundreds, thousands of years after he lived. His influence and impact continues to be felt. So that's David. That's the life of David, and it finishes the book of 2 Samuel. The book of 2 Samuel. We will pick up next week with First Kings. First Kings is when we pick up, and if it's possible for things to get more messy, the messiness that was previously held in a single person now expands and it goes into the rest of ancient Israel. Ancient Israel just falls apart. So that's what you got to look forward to next week. Ancient Israel falling apart. So we'll be picking up in First Kings. We already dabbled in it a little bit. The whole succession thing appears in First Kings, but we'll be focusing on Solomon when we pick up next week. So what do you guys think? David, tell me your opinions. Tell me your thoughts. What do you think of David? You like him? Don't like him? Does his story bother you? Are you like, nah, he's a cool guy? Like, what do you guys think? David, thumbs up. Come on, give me at least an emoticon. Throw in a GIF for me. Throw in something fun at me. Did you like and do you find inspiration from the fact that he's messy? Or are you like, wow, I didn't even know that stuff about him? I kind of look at the guy a little differently now. He's a messy dude and complex. He's a soldier. He's a murderer. He's a father. He rescues, he worships, he writes beautiful psalms. But there's a lot of ups, but there's plenty of downs. He was human. Thank you, Michelle. Yes, he's human. Yeah, Patty, I know, disappointed in David. Me too. There are moments where, David is standing at the precipice of being just this incredible character, and he's human. He makes mistakes. He does dumb stuff. And so because of that, I think it's okay for us to feel a measure of disappointment, that he let God down. He let us down. And in the same way, we do the same thing because we're human too, right? And so, it gives us space for the reality of our own disappointments. Yeah, totally, Susan. I love it. We say we live in strange times now, but I think history is both amazing and messy and full, right? I mean, that's great perspective. Like we talk about today, and anytime somebody talks about how the world is getting further messy, or it's never been so bad, or the world is getting worse and worse. Gosh, take a deep breath and read some of the Bible, and you realize how quickly the world has always been a mess, man. That's why Jesus had to come. It's not that it's getting worse per se. It's just always been worse. That's the problem. Yeah, there you go. Sarah, gives me hope that God used David in his highs and his lows. Amen. You're totally right. That God uses us in our good moments and God uses us in our low moments, that God can do both. God can take us in our great, mountaintop moments, and God can be there and help us and still use even the fractured moments of our lives, right? Absolutely. Yeah, Hallie, there we go. People often forget. Yeah, we forget. It's humbling when you realize David was loved and forgiven by God. I mean, David is loved, forgiven, and he is the progenitor of Jesus. He is the guy that Jesus, Jesus is descended from this guy. He's tied back to this guy. That is humbling to know how messy the story of the people of God is. And that messiness now translates to our current day. This is why Jesus had to come, is to forgive me, to forgive you, to forgive David, and to be the kind of king that none of us could be, that not even David, a man after God's own heart, could ever actually be. And so this should all drive us to see our need for Jesus and to find our hope in Jesus, right? This is what David's story ironically does. A human king doesn't cut it. And that's why Jesus is so incredible. He is both human and divine, and therefore can be that perfect king that we need. So good. So good. John, thank you. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Trudy, glad that you are here with us as well. We'll see you next week. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out. I love spending time with you. It's a blast, and it was fun to be back tonight, given just that I was gone last week. But thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the Christ Church online community. Christ Church is a church. We are now, guys, a church that is both online and on site. I mean, that's like the new normal. We are online and on site. You can join us online and on site this coming Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. As always, invite somebody, bring somebody, so that they can know, that their messy lives has hope too. In fact, we're starting a new sermon series coming up, Strapped. It's going to be great. Why? Because money is messy. People are messy with their money. Even if you have money, if you don't have money, whether you're stuck in between, dealing with and navigating finances is one of the biggest issues that people face on a day-to-day basis. By the way, we're in the middle of a pandemic, if you didn't notice, which has had significant impacts on businesses, on economics, on people's savings, and on day-to-day living within the concept of budgets and financing and monies. So we are going to be doing this 4-week sermon series where we talk about money. You're going to have some of Pastor Bob's up this week. I'm coming in the future, and we are going to tag team an incredible sermon series called Strap. So let people know and invite them. Tell them to tune in. Text them the website or the live stream. Come and join us. Not only that, but of course, if you want to join me Thursday morning, love to have you join me. Tune in. We're going to be on the same platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and the various Facebook places that we're popping up in right now. Thursday, 7:30 a.m. we'll be here. You can join me for Thursday morning meditation. Would love to have you join me as always. It's a totally different kind of gig. It's a totally different kind of vibe to it. We do prayer, we do some reading of scripture, and then we do some Holy Spirit shout outs and God moments and good God stuff. So come, tune, hang out with me. Join me for that if you are interested, and free. It's a great way to start your Thursday morning. Thanks for hanging out with me on this Tuesday night. Thanks for tuning in and spending time learning about the character of David. We'll pick it up next week, so come back and hear more. If you ever miss it, you can always see the replay on YouTube or Facebook. Thanks, guys. God bless. Have a wonderful night. Yeah. Talk to you all soon. God bless, and bye.